Hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, leave in the comments below. Hooyah Navy! Hi, Asking RTC here, and I was on deployment. Well, sort of. I was on patrol, which is very similar to deployment. You see, United States ships go on deployment, and ships that are forward deployed or are like in Europe or in Japan go on patrols. So they're not as long as deployments, and they happen more often, and they kind of stay in that area that they're assigned to. So I was actually sent over to a ship that was on patrol because they needed someone. So that's called going TAD or TEMAD. I was looking it up, and it's pretty much the same thing. TAD is described as a duty at one or more locations away from the permanent duty station, and TEMAD is a type of temporary duty involving a journey away from the service member's duty station. So either way, you go over, you help someone out, and you come back, or you go out to get either training or something like that. TAD could also mean when you go to school. So people can sometimes be at a command, they need another school, and then to do their job, so they go sent to that school and they come back. So that's being TAD to that school at that time. That's your reporting area and not your normal reporting area. So if you're assigned to a ship and then you go to school, then you report to that school until it's done, and then you go back to your ship. It's the same thing for me. I got sent over to another ship because they needed some help. They didn't have the NEC that I had, and then they needed to go on patrol, and it was a critical NEC, and they sent me over there. So let's talk about that. So what are we talking about here? What I'm talking about is I was in the yards, so my ship was not going out to sea. And what happens is you have like the sea time that they track. So how often are you out in the ocean? So if you're out in the ocean a lot or have a lot high op tempo, then they won't pull you, or they'll even tell you, hey, you can't get underway anymore, and that can affect the whole ship. But for us, it was the opposite. It affected the whole ship. Is we were in the yards, so we haven't been going out to sea, so our op tempo was zero, non-existent. So what happened was there was a ship that needed someone who does my job, and they didn't have it. So they saw that I hadn't been out to the ocean for a while, and along with a list of other people, and I was on that list. But the thing is, they needed two jobs, and I was on both lists. So the chances of me being picked were pretty high, because they could just choose me and have me do both jobs instead of just grabbing two people. So I was given, hey, you're on this list. We got to send out an email and saying whether or not you can support, do you have personal stuff going on with your family and stuff, because this is only a 10 days heads up kind of a thing. It's not like, hey, you knew this was going to happen. Deployments are usually set up in a schedule. Now, they wouldn't really share how often we go on those deployments, or in a sense of when it's going to happen. That's operational security. But we know when they're coming up. I know on my ship right now when the next deployment is, and it's not for a while, and we're fully prepared. Yeah, things can change. They might shift a few months, but even then, you're given a year's worth of heads up of whether or not you're going to go. So you make plans, you make everything work. So it's not a big deal, You join the Navy, you go on deployments. Join the military, you go on deployments, really. So this time I was only given, 10 days. Hey, you're on this list, and if you get selected, you're going. Very quickly. I was not planning, I had Christmas plans with my family, That's part of being in the military. It happens sometimes. So, I put, I really don't want to. I did not volunteer. I volunteered no. Doesn't make a difference, obviously, because they still picked me. But the thing is that there's a list of 10 people, all these 10 people fit it. And these 2 people volunteered yes. They're down to go, hey, let's go. They're most likely to get picked. So, I volunteered no, and my commandant said, no, we need them. Because, we're coming out of the yards. So they ended up picking me, and I went. I had 10 days, so that kind of sucks, but with a very short notice. But what you gonna do? That happens. Now, with that being said, how often do you get selected for TEMAD like I did to go on a random deployment that you weren't prepared for? Not very often, to my knowledge, at least in my experience. I've even looked a couple of times. The only people I've seen, it started happening recently on my ship, and I'd never seen it before. And so it's happened to me, and it's happened to about 15 other people on my ship. now we're all back and we're getting ready to do these important things and coming out of the yard, so they can't really pull us anymore. But that's kind of like where I've been. So the last 5 to 6 months, I've actually been over in the Mediterranean, and yes, I was around all that stuff that's happening with the Gaza and Israel and everything like that. We'll talk about that later in a different video. But no, I was not on the ship that was being shot at and shooting, but I was with the deployed forces for 6 fleets that was near the area in the Mediterranean Sea. They were in the Red Sea. So mostly we just dealt with a lot of Russians. But that then does bring up the question, how often do you actually get deployed? Well, it's not really how often you get deployed, it's how often do you get underway. So to explain, underway is anytime the ship leaves the pier and goes out. So you might get underway for a day. You might get underway that morning, go out, do some drills, practice some other ships with some maneuvers. Maybe you got to make sure that some gear that you fix in engineering works, or you got to radiate some radars, and you can't do that in portal, else you'll set off everyone's car alarms and be opening and closing garage doors. And so they go out and do that. Maybe you had to do some live fire exercises with your 5-inch or something like that. And I'm talking about cruise and destroyers, because that's all I've been on. And then you come back for the day. There's the fun ones, where you go underway for a Friday and you come back on a Monday and you just continue the work week. So those ones are not that great. But you got Monday through Friday, you might get underway for 2 days, like Wednesday or Thursday. So you actually do get underway quite a lot of times when it comes to the Navy. Not just for deployments. You actually get underway just to do normal routine things. Because not only do you as a sailor need to get qualified in your watch stations, but sometimes that means you have to be out at sea to get qualified. And sometimes the ship itself needs to get qualified. So the ship may have gotten an upgrade and we need to operationally test it or op test it. So that means we have to get underway, check it out, make sure it works. So there are those little underways that happen, and you usually know when those happen. They're not very random. They can be at times, but you usually know a couple of weeks ahead of time if you're going to be getting underway for a few days or not. But when it comes to deployments, it really depends, because from ship to ship it differs. Now, if you're in a smaller ship like a cruiser or destroyer, they're eventually going to bring back frigates. Those are what we call small boys. They get underway more often than the other ones, but they don't last as long. So you might get on deployment 1 to 2 times per rotation of a ship. And if you're on a ship for 5 years, you might go on 1 or 2 deployments. You might be on a ship for 5 years and never go on deployment. On my first ship, I was on it for 5 years. I only went on 1 deployment, but we went underway a lot. So there's still a give and take on that. And so aircraft carriers, they can go on deployments that can last up to a year, but then they don't go on deployment again for another 2 to 3 years because they have to do workups. It really depends. Each ship is going to have different operational responsibilities. There are some things that never go on deployment. Some deployment means that you go, depending on your rate, to an area, and then you use the small boats or ships there, and then you come back home. So a deployment might be more like someone in the Marines or the Army, where they're deployed to an area, and it has nothing to do with anything of your ship or anything like that, right? They're going out there to support the operation and come back. Same thing. I mean, that's what your ship is doing too. It's going out on deployment to support operation and come back. The only difference is you stay on the ship the whole time. So which is good or possibly bad. Now the question is, are there some rates that don't go on deployments? Yes and no. There are some rates that get assigned things that don't mean they have to go on deployment. You might just have shore duty stations everywhere you go. For example, if you're a corpsman, or like the dock, and you're a dental corpsman, it's a possibility you could spend your entire career where you just sit inside a hospital the entire time. Really not that bad of a gig. Could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. It really depends. You choose your rate, you choose your fate. Or you can be very similar to what all the other rates are, where they are required to have what's called a sea-shore rotation. So what happens is, after you finish doing what you need to do to learn your rate, like going through the A schools and then the C schools, you go to a ship. So the ship is your first rotation. All right, so you'll be on there anywhere 3 to 5 years. Some rates, they require them to be at sea for 5 years before they can go to shore duty for 3 years. Some of them require 3. It really depends on your rate. So you do that rotation, and you can look this up on mynavyhr.com, where it'll show you what rates have what seashore rotations. You don't need a special access to do it. You can just Google it on your phone right now and do it. And so if you're looking to go do a certain rate and you want to know what kind of rotation is, mynavyhr.com is great for that. They'll tell you whether or not you're going to be at a seashore rotation. They'll tell you how much it is, if it's at 5-3, 5-3, or 5 years at sea, 3 years at shore, 5 years at sea, 3 years at shore, forever, or is it going to be 3-3? You know, it might change. It really depends on your rate. That doesn't change very often either. My rate has pretty much stayed the same for the entire time I've been in. I've been over a decade. It really hasn't changed the rotation whatsoever. But where you're going to go to shore duty and sea duty does depend on your rate. For example, my rate only can go on cruiser and destroyers. So I got to think, where are cruiser destroyers? Luckily, they're pretty much stationed everywhere. But if your rate can only go on specific ships, that means I'll never go on an aircraft carrier. So those are certain things I keep in mind. Oh, I'm not worried about that because I'll never go there, kind of a thing. But your rate might require you to go special places. For example, if you're a corpsman, you're probably going to go to some sort of hospital or some base that has some sort of hospital setup for you to continue doing your job at shore and supporting that command. Similar, right? Of course, unless you go RDC like I was, they'll take all rates and sizes, really. So I hope that answers the question of where I've been. Yes, I'm going to continue making videos. I really like doing this and trying to inform people as best as I can when it comes to military and those who are veterans or helping them keep up to date with what's going on, and just sharing information and stories that you're allowed to share, and just keeping the heritage going. If you have any questions, in the comment below, and I'll come back to one video a week. And you guys left me a lot of emails, and I appreciate it so much. A lot of content has come out that some of y'all would like my input on, and I'm happy to share it. But I'm gonna try to get away from that reaction video stuff and try to give actual information, doing resources, looking things up, showing where I'm finding it, and showing how you can find it too, so you can make the right decision. Hooyah Navy.